Much of the country seeing temperatures above 30 degrees, and Laura is here. Are we officially in a heat wave? And is this actually climate change risk starting again to crystallise in our daily lives?
Yes. It has the fingerprints of climate change on it, and we are now officially in a heat wave. 32 degrees for the rest of the week. And in fact, a study was done by Climate Central yesterday. The heat wave we are currently in is 5 times more likely because of climate change. So a natural world reaching these temperatures versus one where we have fossil fuels in our atmosphere. And I often show the climate stripes. They're the stripes that go and simplify a graph. Every single line represents the average temperature on Earth, whether it's cooler or warmer than average, but it's the rapid warming at the end. And we know that this year is set to be the hottest year ever recorded. Another dark red stripe will be added right at the end.
Well, thanks, Laura. And we know that you sometimes get backlash, don't you, on social media for your coverage of climate stories here on Good Morning Britain. And we now have someone who's experienced that to the point of having to quit his job and move to a different state. It's US weather forecaster Chris Gloninger.
Chris has been highlighting the connection between extreme weather events and climate change, but doing that in Idaho, he faced huge threats and harassment. Let's have a look at his final time appearing on KCCI News Channel, where he spoke actually openly and emotionally about having to leave his job that he's wanted to do since he was a young boy because of all of that online abuse.
And Chris joins us now live from Massachusetts. Good morning to you. I mean, what a decision you've had to make then to give up your dream job, a career that you've loved, because of the abuse that you've been getting from what you've been saying.
Charlotte, Ed, thanks for having me. And you're right, it was a decision that I didn't take it lightly. And it was months of soul searching and figuring out the next steps of what exactly would be a good way to continue to improve climate literacy in this country, but step away from that public spotlight a while and try to refocus my life a little bit. And it was a challenge, as you mentioned, as you heard in my goodbye. It's a dream that I've had since second grade, since a hurricane hit my hometown. And I already worked in a major market in the United States. I made it to Boston, Massachusetts, was there for 6 years, started the country's first weekly series on climate change. And this sounds like a cliche, but I tried to make a difference. My wife and I didn't have connections in Iowa. It was a place in the United States that needed to hear about climate change. There was a void, and I simply tried to help fill that void.
People will be totally amazed at the idea that because you were reporting facts about the weather, that you faced death threats to such an extent that you had to not only leave your job, but leave the state in which you were living and flee, and that every night going home you were worrying about your safety. What is it about these conspiracy theories which seem to be so powerful in America that people are putting together vaccines or kind of COVID or politics, and now people who are presenting the weather and saying this is all part of some conspiracy?
And it's not just me, and I've followed Laura for a long time, and I know when she talks about climate change, she gets similar messages. This isn't just me. This is a much larger issue, and it's essentially a war on science and facts, Ed, as you mentioned, and that's exactly what I was doing, but I wasn't even trying to be at a pulpit and preach to people. I was focusing on renewable energy in Iowa. 63% of the grid is powered by wind energy. It's a huge impact on agriculture, which is 11% of the GDP. So it just made sense. But in 2016, we entered into a phase here where ideology holds more weight, at least for some people, than facts, science, and data. And that is where we've really derailed, and not just in the United States, but globally. And what's fascinating is the Yale program on climate change communication and George Mason University have looked at Americans and their public opinion on climate change, and only 11% are dismissive, 10% are doubtful. So it doesn't even follow political lines. So Ed, to your point, this is just such a small minority, but it's that conspiracy theory, and you pour gas on a fire and it goes out of control. And that's exactly what we have.
I mean, it's an important message, isn't it, that you're putting across, Chris? Are you confident that those people who are resistant, who don't want to hear it, their views can be changed? You know, what's going to happen with this?
I think they can, and I hope that I didn't give up. And in ways, I think I can make a bigger difference in my new role as a senior climate scientist. But I was in a part of the country where I don't know where somebody's willing to draw the line, where they're willing to make a stand. And that's what was concerning. But I think that there are some people that if you talk about the science and try to engage and explain the why, I think that if you're not speaking down to them and can help them understand how it's affecting their day-to-day lives, I think we can make a difference. And that's why it's so critical what we're doing in the United States as meteorologists, what Laura and her colleagues are doing over in the UK. It's so important.
Well, let's bring in Laura now, because Laura, I know this is something that you've experienced as well, isn't it?
And I think that Chris and myself just love weather. We're so passionate about it. But in our careers, we're reporting on more frequent, more severe weather more often. And loads of people have great comments when we do climate coverage on the show. But yes, myself, I've also received a very small amount of people giving some really horrible tweets to me on nearly a daily basis. And actually, I open the tweets that say, don't read this, it might say something offensive, because for me, it's important to understand why people don't agree with what I'm saying. And then for me, just to report the facts and just to state facts and say why that isn't true and just stick with the science. But we have to just look at our heat wave, the heat wave in Europe, the flooding in Greece, and all of these things to connect the dots that it's climate change. And as Chris says, if we communicate it, people understand, then they can make changes and make a difference and actually help to limit these impacts. So what we do is really important. And as he said, I have a World Weather WhatsApp group, and actually all meteorologists right around the world are receiving the same abuse.
I mean, as you were saying, Laura, it's about facts, isn't it? I mean, if you take the next 2 or 3 days in Britain, we're going to have very hot temperatures at night. Kind of, I think they get categorised as tropical. This has hardly ever happened in September in our country's history, isn't that right?
And when I was a junior forecaster, I was taught to never forecast a record because they stood for hundreds of years for a reason. And now the records are just breaking so frequently. So, yes, we're likely to have our hottest September night. We've just had our hottest August. We're likely to have our hottest year. We just need to make sure that this heating doesn't continue as rapidly, because then all of the severe weather we've seen is just going to get so much worse.
It's really good to know, though, that there's a support network of meteorologists around the world.
I know, I love that.
Kind of looking after each other. Chris and Laura kind of... You know, I hope, Chris, that your move from Iowa to Massachusetts is going well, and that you can continue to make a contribution to this kind of global debate, because it's really important. We need to hear your voice, and so don't be deterred.
Many thanks, Ed, Charlotte, and Laura. It was great talking with you this morning.
Oh, well, listen, thank you very much for joining us, and, yeah, carry on that climate message, and thank you very much. Good to see you, Chris.